He didn't raise his voice. He never does. That is the thing about Shohei Ohtani that people who have only watched him from the outside sometimes fail to understand. The power he carries inside a baseball organization is not expressed through demands or ultimatums or the kind of theatrical leverage that lesser stars have used throughout the history of the sport. It doesn't arrive with an agent's phone call at midnight or a leaked story planted carefully in the right publication to apply the right pressure at the right moment. It arrives quietly. Deliberately. In the form of a conversation that the other side of the table treats with the kind of attention that only gets paid to men who have earned the right to be heard at that level. Ohtani had a conversation. And when it was over, two Dodgers were no longer Dodgers. That is how much has changed since the day he signed in Los Angeles. That is how completely the architecture of power inside that organization has been reshaped by the presence of one man whose ability to influence outcomes extends far beyond what happens between the white lines on a baseball field. The request was accepted. And now Roki Sasaki and Dalton Rushing are headed somewhere else. To understand what just happened, you have to start in a place that most people haven't thought about carefully enough. There are franchises in professional baseball where a superstar's opinion about roster construction is welcomed, respected, and then quietly set aside while the adults in the room make the actual decisions. The player is thanked for his input. His perspective is filed somewhere. And then the front office does what front offices have always done, weighs the contracts, calculates the service time, models the projections, and arrives at a conclusion that has very little to do with what the man on the mound actually said he wanted. The Dodgers are not that franchise. Not anymore. Possibly not for a long time. When Ohtani speaks about the roster, when he makes clear, in whatever quiet and deliberate way he makes things clear, people inside that building listen with a different quality of attention. Not because they are afraid of him. Not because his contract gives him veto power over personnel decisions in any formal or contractual sense. But because they have watched what happens when Ohtani is aligned with a situation versus when he is not. They have seen the difference between a fully engaged Shohei Ohtani and a Shohei Ohtani who is merely going through the motions of cooperation. And that difference, measured in wins and losses and October outcomes and the billion-dollar machinery that surrounds all of it, is not a difference any rational organization would choose to ignore. So when the conversation happened, when Ohtani's position on Roki Sasaki and Dalton Rushing became known internally, the front office did not file it away. They acted. Roki Sasaki arrived in Los Angeles carrying the weight of enormous expectation. He was not just a pitching prospect. He was a specific kind of prospect, the kind that organizations build narratives around before he has thrown a single professional pitch on American soil. The kind whose name appears in conversations about rotations and playoff matchups and long-term competitive windows before any of those things have had the chance to become real. He was, in the language of baseball optimism, the future arriving early. The reality of his time with the Dodgers was more complicated than the narrative suggested. That is almost always how it goes. The gap between what a prospect represents in theory and what he produces in practice is the space where baseball organizations spend most of their emotional energy. Sasaki was talented. No serious person disputed that. The arm was real. The repertoire was real. The potential, measured by anyone willing to look at it honestly, remained genuine even when the results on the field told a more uncertain story. But potential and fit are two different things. And somewhere inside the Dodgers organization, inside the specific calculations that go into building a pitching staff around a two-way player who requires a level of structural accommodation that no other player in the sport demands, a conclusion was reached about Roki Sasaki's place in the long-term picture. That conclusion, it appears, was influenced significantly by what Ohtani said in that conversation. Not because Ohtani wanted Sasaki gone for personal reasons. Baseball is rarely that simple, and Ohtani is rarely that petty. But because the question of how a pitching staff is constructed around a man who both pitches and bats is not an abstract organizational question. It is a practical, day-to-day, game plan level question that the person at the center of it experiences more directly than anyone else in the building. When Ohtani spoke about what he needed, about what the structure around him needed to look like in order for all of it to work the way the Dodgers needed it to work, Sasaki's name apparently fell on the wrong side of that equation. Dalton Rushing's situation carried a different kind of weight. Where Sasaki's departure is about pitching staff architecture and rotation construction and the complex mathematics of a two-way player's roster impact, Rushing's exit is about something more personal. More human. More connected to
टाइटल में पढ़े ना पे ला दे में डिस्क्रिप्शन में